Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute clinical precision.
Right. It's very cut and dry.
Exactly. Think about orthopedics, right? You break your arm, you go to the hospital, they take an x-ray, and the doctor puts that film up on the light box.
Then you can see exactly what's wrong.
Yeah, you see this jagged white line cutting right through the bone. The doctor just points at it and says, there it is. That is the point of failure.
It leaves absolutely no room for debate. You are looking at a localized, verifiable rupture.
Right. It's clean, it's legible. But then I want you to think about the environment you live in. I want you to think about just walking down the street.
Which is a vastly different experience.
Totally different. Have you ever walked past a completely sterile, windowless concrete building? Let's say it's a brutalist government utility office, or maybe one of those massive monolithic telecom hubs right in the middle of a downtown grid.
Like that famous AT&T long lines building in New York.
Yes. The one with literally zero windows. Have you ever stood in the shadow of a structure like that and felt a sudden, almost unexplainable sense of dread?
Just this heavy weight.
Yeah, a profound isolation that washes over you for absolutely no logical reason.
I think most people have, honestly, whether they consciously register it or not.
But we usually just ignore it, right?
We do. The typical modern response is to just brush that feeling off.
Yeah.
We assume we just have poor taste in architecture, or, we blame our mood on an overcast sky.
We think we're just having a bad day.
Exactly. We treat the building as a perfectly neutral object and assume the negative emotion is entirely our own subjective invention.
We say, oh, that's just an ugly building, and we keep walking. We treat it like it's just a matter of interior design, like picking the wrong color palette for a living room or something.
But it's actually so much more than that.
It really is. And today, we are taking a massive deep dive into a text that flips that entire assumption completely on its head.
It really redefines the whole experience.
Today's source material argues that your feeling of dread is actually a perfectly calibrated diagnostic response. Your soul is reacting to a literal moral failure embedded in the architecture itself.
It is a staggering claim, and it requires a complete paradigm shift to really understand.
So what are we looking at today?
Today's deep dive is based on a really comprehensive treatise titled The Geometry of Conscience.
Subtitled Moral Order, Ontological Alignment, and the Architecture of Civilization.
Right. It's written by Jamie Thornberry and published by Love Life Light Publishing.
It's a hefty piece of work.
It is. What Thornberry is attempting here is to completely change the lens through which we view our cities. We aren't looking at civil engineering today.
Not at all.
We aren't looking at zoning as a bureaucratic function or urban planning as just a matter of traffic flow. We are looking at ontology.
Okay, let's unpack this, because for anyone listening, and I know you, the learner, are always looking for that profound shortcut to understanding the hidden forces shaping your world, the word ontology sounds incredibly intimidating.
It does sound very academic.
It sounds like something you need a PhD to even pronounce correctly. But it is the absolute key to our mission today. We are going to decode the hidden moral language of the buildings, the streets, and the cities we all live in.
It's the foundation of everything Thornberry argues.
So let's define the battleground here. When Thornberry says architecture is an ontological issue, what are we actually talking about?
Let's strip away the academic jargon. Ontology is simply the study of the nature of being.
Okay, the nature of being.
Right. It asks the most foundational question possible, which is, what is the fundamental nature of reality?
And how does that connect to a concrete building?
Well, when Thornberry applies ontology to architecture, the argument is that the built environment cannot possibly be morally neutral.
It can't just be an object.
Exactly.
Yeah.
A building is not just a pile of bricks, steel, and glass assembled to keep the rain off our heads. It is the visible, physical inscription of an underlying ethical order.
So it's the physical manifestation of what a society actually believes about reality.
Consider the implications of that for a second. A society incarnates its conscience into space.
Wow. Incarnates its conscience.
Yes. The city you live in, the streets you navigate every day, the skyline you look at every evening against the sunset, none of that is accidental.
It's deliberate.
It is a frozen moral map. It is a culture's conscience made visible in concrete and steel.
That immediately gives me chills. Because if you look at a lot of modern skylines or the endless sprawling oceans of gray strip malls and asphalt parking lots,
it's not a pretty picture.
no, the conscience being made visible looks incredibly bleak. It looks entirely disconnected from anything human.
It reflects a very specific modern mindset.
But what I appreciate about Thornberry's text is that it doesn't just leave us with a vague, poetic critique of modern cities. It's not just complaining.
No, it's highly structured.
Right. The treatise provides a highly specific metaphysical blueprint to measure our environment against. And it's based on 3 foundational principles: love, light, and life.
This triadic structure is really the bedrock of the entire book. But we have to be very careful here to define these terms exactly as Thornberry uses them.
Because they sound a bit cliché at first glance.
Exactly. These words, love, light, life, they've been completely hijacked by greeting cards and pop songs. Thornberry is not using them in a sentimental way at all.
So how are they being used?
These are proposed as structural laws of reality. They are the objective conditions that determine whether any system, whether that's a biological ecosystem, a social fabric, or a physical city, coheres and survives, or disintegrates and collapses.
Let's define them, because I will admit, when I first saw the word love in an architectural treatise, my mind immediately went to some hippy-dippy interior design concept.
That's a very common reaction.
It's like, what, we need more heart-shaped windows? Are we doing pink velvet walls?
I think that's exactly where the modern mind goes, which honestly shows how impoverished our vocabulary has become.
Fair point.
Thornberry defines love in the ontological sense as the principle of proper relational ordering.
Proper relational ordering, okay?
It is about self-giving unity. The core question is, how do individual beings exist in harmonious communion rather than in isolated fragmentation?
So how does that translate to concrete and glass? Like, how does a building show love?
Think about the geometry of a space and what it physically forces humans to do. A structure ordered by love is explicitly designed for encounter.
It wants people to interact.
Yes. It assumes at a baseline level that human beings are relational creatures who require mutual recognition to actually flourish.
Okay, give me an example of that in the real world.
So imagine a classical European public square. The seating naturally faces inward.
Right, looking at other people.
There are shaded arcades that protect pedestrians from the weather, which gently encourages them to linger, to stop, to converse with a neighbor. The physical space is actively facilitating human connection.
So the architecture is acting as a host.
Exactly. That is the spatial geometry of love.
Okay, let's contrast that with something most of us deal with every day. Think about an 8-lane highway that physically slices a neighborhood in half.
A very common American reality.
Let's say you live on the north side and your local grocery store is on the south side. The highway makes it physically impossible for you to walk there without risking your life.
You can't just stroll across 8 lanes of traffic.
No. You are forced to get into a car, merge onto the highway, exit, and park in a massive asphalt lot. That highway isn't just an infrastructure choice to speed up commute times, is it?
According to this framework, no. It is a structural failure of love. It physically enforces isolation. It prevents relationship.
It literally builds a wall between people.
Let me add a layer to that.
Really?
It doesn't just prevent relationship, it engineers alienation.
Engineers it. How so?
Well, when the environment dictates that you must wrap yourself in 2 tons of metal and glass just to acquire food, it has fundamentally reordered your relationship to your neighbors.
Oh, because I'm in a car now.
Right. You no longer view them as fellow citizens to converse with on a sidewalk. You view them as obstacles in your lane.
Wow. They're just traffic to me now.
That is what a failure of love looks like in urban planning.
That makes perfect sense. It changes how I view humanity. Now let's look at the second principle in the triad. Light. And again, I'm assuming this goes far beyond just having big bay windows to let the sun shine in.
Far beyond. In Thornberry's framework, light is the principle of intelligibility and truth.
Intelligibility, meaning it makes sense.
Yes. It is the disclosure of reality as something ordered, rational, and knowable.
So how does a building possess light? Does it just have to be well lit?
A building governed by light reveals its true nature. It is honest. Its proportions make rational sense to the human eye.
Honest in what way?
The materials are what they appear to be. If a pillar looks like it is supporting a massive roof, it is actually a load-bearing pillar, not some hollow piece of plastic tacked on for decoration.
So it's not faking it.
Right. The building doesn't obscure its function, and critically, it doesn't dwarf the human individual into insignificance.
It respects our scale.
Exactly. When a structure is confusing, disorienting, or aggressively ugly, Thornberry argues it is suffering from a privation of light.
Which leads us directly to the third principle, which is life. Thornberry defines life as the flourishing actuality that emerges from alignment with the good.
That's a very dense definition.
It is. It's about sustainability, yes, but also durability and intergenerational continuity.
A structure governed by life is built with the assumption of a future.
Assumption of a future. I like that.
It honors the past that developed its techniques, and it provides for the unborn generations who will eventually inherit it. It is inherently non-disposable.
It was meant to stick around.
Yes, it sustains the biological, psychological, and social health of the people who interact with it over centuries.
You know, sitting here and looking at this triad, love, light, and life, it really makes me think of how we build software today.
Software. Okay, where are you going with this?
Well, the listener's probably familiar with how a computer program or an app works, right? You have the back-end code, which is entirely invisible to the user. Right, the databases and algorithms. Exactly. It's just lines of logic, algorithms, and strict rules about how pieces of information are allowed to relate to one another. And then you have the front end, the user interface.
The buttons and graphics.
That's the shiny stuff, the things you actually click and touch on your screen.
I like where you're going with this. Expand on the relationship between the two.
So if the invisible source code, the back end, is buggy, disorganized, or logically disordered, it really doesn't matter how pretty the front-end graphics were supposed to be.
The interface will fail.
Exactly. The visible user interface is going to glitch. Buttons won't work. The screen will freeze. The system will crash. And as the user, you feel incredibly frustrated, alienated, and confused.
You're completely stuck.
Right. And Thornberry seems to be saying that love, light, and life are the invisible back-end source code of reality itself. They are the algorithms of human flourishing.
That is a phenomenal way to translate the ontology.
If a society's invisible moral code is corrupted, if we prioritize extreme economic efficiency over human dignity or atomized isolation over community, then the user interface of our world, which is our architecture, is going to glitch.
It has no choice but to fail.
It will fail. And that feeling of profound dread you get when you walk past a massive, sterile, brutalist concrete block. That is you, the user, experiencing a system crash because the underlying code of the city is corrupt.
What's fascinating here is how well your analogy touches on how Thornberry applies this to the concept of evil or disorder.
Oh, the philosophy of evil.
Yes. The text leans heavily into a classical philosophical tradition, specifically Augustinian and Thomistic thought, which argues that evil does not possess an independent ontological status.
Wait, I'm going to need you to explain that. Because when I look at Boston City Hall, which is this terrifying, top-heavy, brutalist concrete monster, it feels very much like a positive, active force of ugliness.
I know exactly the building you mean.
It feels like an architect woke up one morning and intentionally manufactured darkness.
It absolutely feels that way to our senses, but ontologically, darkness does not exist as an independent, measurable force.
It doesn't.
Think about physics. Darkness is simply the physical state of a space where photons or light have been withdrawn.
Right. You can't measure a unit of dark.
Exactly. You cannot measure a unit of darkness. You can only measure the absence of light. Cold operates by the exact same physical law.
Cold isn't a thing.
Right. Cold isn't a thing that blows into your house. Cold is merely the absence of kinetic energy, the absence of heat in the atoms around you.
Okay, I follow the physics there. If I open my front door in winter, I'm not letting the cold in. I'm technically letting the heat out.
Correct.
How does Thornberry map that physics concept onto architecture?
Thornberry is arguing that disordered architecture doesn't actually create a positive force called ugliness or evil.
So the architect didn't build evil.
Right. When you walk down a decaying, isolating alleyway with blank walls and flickering sodium lights, the alleyway isn't actively radiating some dark energy.
It just feels like it.
What you are experiencing is a spatial void where light, love, and life have simply been withdrawn.
Oh, wow.
The profound isolation you feel in that alleyway, that is the privation of love. The disorientation and fear you feel, that is the privation of light.
Then decay.
The decay, the filth, the crumbling concrete, that is the privation of life.
Let me make sure I'm really grasping the scale of this. So when a massive commercial developer buys up a historic, walkable, vibrant neighborhood, bulldozes it, and builds a 1 million square foot windowless distribution warehouse surrounded by barbed wire.
A very common occurrence.
Right. They aren't technically building isolation. They're simply withdrawing the architecture of love and light from that geographic coordinate.
Exactly.
And isolation naturally rushes in to fill the void exactly the same way cold rushes into a room when the furnace dies.
That is precisely what happens. The new structure becomes a monumental manifestation of absence. And this is why the physical world begins to actively testify against its builders.
Buildings are testifying against us.
Yes. They stand there as massive, concrete indictments of what our society failed to value.
If this underlying source code love, light, and life is so fundamental to human flourishing, it begs a really massive historical question.
Which is?
If this is baked into the very nature of reality, did previous eras understand this better than we do today?
That's the logical next question.
Because when you travel to the historic center of Rome and stand inside the Pantheon, or when you walk into a medieval Gothic cathedral like Chartres, you do not feel that system crash dread.
You feel the exact opposite.
You feel awe. You feel physically and spiritually grounded. Did the ancients know the source code that we somehow completely forgot?
They unquestionably did, and Thornberry explicitly maps out this historical continuity by looking at the classical and medieval foundations of Western building.
So we have to go back in time.
Yes. To understand how we lost the code, we first have to look at when it was fully integrated. The text points us toward the ancient Roman architect Vitruvius.
Right, if you take an Architecture 101 class anywhere in the world, you learn about him in the first week. He wrote De Architecture.
Yes, the foundational treatise on architecture. And Vitruvius is famous for his triad, his 3 irreducible conditions for a well-built structure: firmitas, utilitas, and velustas.
Strength, utility, and beauty.
Exactly. For nearly 2 millennia, these were considered the non-negotiable moral framework for any construction.
You couldn't build without them.
Right. What Thornberry does in this text, which is quite brilliant, is map the Vitruvian triad directly onto the metaphysical triad of life, love, and light.
Let's draw those connections, because this is where the history and the philosophy really lock together.
Let's start with firmitas, or strength. A building must be physically sound, it must respect the laws of gravity, the sheer strength of its materials, and the environmental conditions of its site in order to endure.
It has to stay standing.
Right. This corresponds perfectly to Thornberry's principle of life sustainability, endurance, and fidelity to physical reality.
That's easy enough to grasp. If a building ignores the laws of physics and collapses, it kills the people inside. It is the ultimate negation of life.
Precisely. Then we look at utilitas, or utility. A building must serve human ends. It must correspond to the actual needs of embodied persons.
So it has to be useful to us.
Right, and this aligns directly with love. It represents architecture in service to human relational needs, providing secure shelter, spaces for commerce, spaces for civic gathering.
It's the building caring for us.
Exactly. It is the built environment adapting itself to care for the human form.
And then the third pillar of Vitruvius is venustus, beauty. And Thornberry aligns beauty with light, the radiance of intelligible order.
That's the connection, yes.
But I have to stop you right here. I'm putting my foot down, and I know the listener is probably practically yelling at their device right now.
Oh, yeah.
Because this is the biggest friction point in the entire discussion.
I welcome the pushback. What is the friction point?
We live in a modern world where it is accepted as absolute, undeniable gospel truth that beauty is subjective.
The eye of the beholder argument.
Exactly. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. It's entirely a matter of cultural conditioning and personal preference. What one person finds beautiful, another person thinks is an absolute monstrosity.
That is the modern consensus, yes.
So if Thornberry is claiming that beauty is an objective ontological reality, that it is literally the light of truth rendered visible in the physical world, how can we possibly defend that?
It's a tough sell today.
How can we measure it? Why is a classical marble column true and a modernist concrete slab false? Isn't the architect who built the concrete slab just expressing their own subjective truth?
That is the most common modern objection, and quite frankly, it reveals just how dramatically our metaphysical baseline has shifted over the last century.
We've completely changed how we see the world.
We have. We have conflated personal taste with objective reality. To dismantle this assumption, Thornberry bypasses modern sociology and turns to the medieval synthesis, specifically the framework articulated by Thomas Aquinas.
Okay, pulling out the heavy hitters of philosophy. What did Aquinas say about beauty that challenges the eye of the beholder narrative?
Aquinas argued fiercely that beauty is absolutely not just subjective ornament. It is not a decorative frosting you apply to a building after it's finished.
It's not just a paint job.
No. He believed beauty is an objective, perceptible manifestation of ontological integrity. It is the real world revealing its inherent truth to our human senses.
So beauty is truth showing itself.
Exactly. And he didn't just leave it as a vague concept. Aquinas grounded objective beauty in three specific measurable conditions that absolutely must be present.
Let's put them to the test. What are Aquinas' three conditions for beauty?
The first condition is integritas, which translates to wholeness or completeness. A thing must be complete according to its specific nature.
Wholeness.
If a building is missing its roof, or if its function is entirely disconnected from its form, it lacks integrity. It is deficient in its very being.
Like a car missing an engine, or a sentence missing its main verb.
Perfect examples.
You wouldn't just look at a car with no engine and say, well, it's not my style. You would say, it is fundamentally broken. It lacks wholeness.
Exactly. It fails the test of integritas. The second condition is consonantia, which translates to proportion or harmony.
Proportion. How parts relate to each other.
Yes. The parts of the object must relate to the whole in a way that is mathematically and rationally ordered.
Like the golden ratio.
Yes, the golden ratio, the symmetry of the human face, the harmonics of a musical chord. These aren't just cultural inventions. They are mathematical realities embedded in the universe.
So how does consonantia work in a building?
In architecture, consonantia means human-scaled design. A doorway should be proportioned to allow a human body to pass through with dignity.
Not making us crawl or making us feel like ants.
Right. A public square should be scaled so that you can recognize a friend's face across the plaza.
So think about a massive, towering, sheer glass skyscraper. It might be an engineering marvel. It might cost $1 billion.
Right.
But if it completely ignores human proportion, if you feel physically crushed and microscopic when you stand on the sidewalk next to a sheer vertical cliff of glass, Aquinas would say it lacks consonantia.
It absolutely does.
It is out of proportion with the human being, and therefore, regardless of what the architect's mother thinks, it is objectively lacking in beauty.
It is a failure of relational order, yes. And that brings us to the final condition Aquinas gives. Claritas, or radiance.
Radiance. That sounds very mystical.
This is perhaps the trickiest for the modern mind to grasp, but it is the most crucial for understanding Thornberry's concept of light. Radiance means that the object shines forth its own truth. It is intelligible.
Meaning, I can understand it just by looking at it.
Exactly. When you look at it, you immediately know what it is. It reviews its purpose, its structural logic, and its nature clearly, without deception.
So a building with claritas is an honest building. A courthouse looks like a place of justice, gravity, and dignity.
Right.
A family home looks like a place of warmth and rest. The building isn't wearing a disguise.
That is precisely it. Beauty, in this classical and medieval view, is truth rendered visible. When a building achieves integritas, which is wholeness, consonantia, proportion, and claritas, honesty, it is objectively radiating light.
So when a modern critic says, beauty is subjective, Thornberry and Aquinas would argue that we are simply confusing personal preference with objective beauty.
We're mixing up two different categories.
I might prefer the taste of chocolate over vanilla. That is a subjective preference.
Mm-hmm.
But the proportional harmony of a Gothic arch or the mathematical grace of a classical dome is objectively aligned with the structural laws of human perception and physical reality.
You've nailed it.
Which means, and this is a really heavy realization, when we build deliberately ugly things, we aren't just making a poor stylistic choice. We are literally lying about reality.
We are suppressing the truth.
We are suppressing the truth of what a human being actually is.
Yes. We are creating what the text refers to as false witnesses in our urban landscapes.
False witnesses. That is so powerful. If the ancients, from Vitruvius all the way through the medieval builders, understood this so intimately, if they knew that geometry, morality, and beauty were an unbreakable triad, when did we sever that connection?
It's a tragic historical shift.
I'm really trying to figure out the timeline here. When did we stop caring about beauty as truth and start building these towering monuments to isolation?
To understand that historical rupture, Thornberry shifts the focus to the 19th century, right into the bleeding heart of the Industrial Revolution.
Okay, the 1800s.
And the text introduces the profound, almost prophetic critique of John Ruskin.
I know Ruskin primarily as a prominent art critic and social thinker in the Victorian era. So this is the 1800s. Factories are popping up everywhere, the sky is choked with coal smoke, and mass production is completely rewriting the landscape of England.
Paint that picture in your mind, because for Ruskin, the shift he was witnessing wasn't just an economic boom or some marvel of new technology.
It wasn't just progress.
He diagnosed it as a profound civilizational moral crisis. Ruskin believed that architecture was completely inseparable from the moral condition of the society that produced it.
So he looked at the factories and saw immorality.
He looked at the new industrial factories and the uniform, mass-produced housing, and he saw a catastrophic rupture between moral order and industrial production.
What exactly was his critique? Was he just a Luddite who hated machines and wanted everyone to go back to farming?
Not at all. His critique was deeply humanistic. He argued that mechanized uniformity actively erodes individual human dignity.
Because everyone is just doing the same repetitive task.
Think about how a building was made before the Industrial Revolution. A stonemason carving a gargoyle or a carpenter fitting a complex timber joint was engaged in highly creative, deeply meaningful labor.
They were craftsmen.
Right. Their individual humanity, their specific joy, and yes, even their slight imperfections were permanently embedded in the physical building.
You'd see their fingerprints on it.
The building was an expression of love and light because it was the product of a human soul. But industrialization introduced mass production. Suddenly, you have a steam-powered press stamping out thousands of identical, soulless iron brackets or millions of perfectly uniform bricks.
It turned the human builder into just another gear in the machine.
Exactly. The worker was completely alienated from the product of his labor. Ruskin argued that the sudden loss of architectural ornament in the industrial era was not a stylistic evolution.
It wasn't just a new trend.
It was the literal, visible loss of joy and meaning in human labor. Furthermore, he relentlessly criticized what he saw as dishonest materials.
Dishonest materials, like what?
Industrial buildings started using cheap veneers to hide cheap iron structures, pretending to be grand stone castles when they were really just metal sheds.
Which directly violates Aquinas' principle of claritas, honesty, and radiance. The building is lying about what it is actually made of.
For Ruskin, dishonest materials and deceptive construction practices reflect a deeper moral corruption. If a society is perfectly willing to fake its architecture, it is perfectly willing to fake its morality.
You know, I've got an analogy that might help crystallize what Ruskin is warning about. Let me bounce this off you and see if it tracks with Thornberry's text.
I'm all ears. Go for it.
Think about the fundamental difference between a massive, home-cooked family meal and a futuristic, highly efficient, gray nutrient paste.
Okay, the nutrient paste.
Let's say it's a Sunday dinner. It takes hours of time. You have to chop the vegetables, you season the meat, you set the table, you gather your family or your friends.
It's a whole ritual.
Now, the purpose of that meal isn't just caloric intake. If it was, you'd just eat raw potatoes over the sink. The purpose of the meal is communion. It's love, light, and life.
Right, it's relational.
It sustains your biology, but it also fosters relationship, it communicates care, and it is beautifully presented to honor the guests.
That is a deeply resonant human experience.
Now imagine a Silicon Valley tech company invents a gray nutrient paste. It is perfectly engineered. It contains exactly 100% of your daily required vitamins, proteins, and carbohydrates.
Very efficient.
It costs 2 cents to manufacture. You can consume it from a plastic tube in exactly 10 seconds while staring at a spreadsheet at your desk.
From a purely utilitarian standpoint, the paste is vastly superior. It possesses maximum utilitas.
Right. But here's my question. Wait, nutrient paste keeps you alive. It saves you 3 hours of cooking time. Isn't that a net positive?
I would push back on that slightly. Does it keep you alive or does it merely prevent you from dying? There is a profound difference between surviving and living.
Exactly. The paste strips away entirely the joy, the culture, the beauty, and the shared humanity of eating. Yes, it gives you calories, but it reduces you to a biological machine that just needs its fuel tank topped off.
It's functional reductionism.
What Ruskin is saying about industrial architecture and what Thornberry is arguing about modern cities is that functional reductionism treats our built environment exactly like that gray nutrient paste.
That is an incredibly sharp analogy. Because when a building is designed strictly for economic efficiency and maximum profit, when it is reduced to a machine for living, to quote Le Corbusier, it strips away the shared joy and culture of dwelling.
It's just a storage unit for humans.
It treats human beings as biological units to be stored, not souls to be nurtured.
We are literally eating the gray paste of architecture every single time we walk through a concrete strip mall.
We are. And this brings us out of the 19th century and into the late modern diagnosis provided by the philosopher Roger Scruton, who Thornberry cites extensively in the text.
Roger Scruton.
Scruton looks at the trajectory that began with Ruskin's industrial factories and identifies where it ultimately led. The complete abandonment of beauty as a civilizational turning point.
What are the specific pathologies Scruton points out? Because when you look at cities today, it feels like whatever disease Ruskin spotted has now fully metastasized.
Scruton identifies three distinct overlapping pathologies in modern architecture. The first is exactly what we just discussed with your analogy. Functional reductionism.
The nutrient paste approach.
This is the militant elevation of utility above all other considerations. If the building is cheap to construct and it houses the required number of workers or server racks, absolutely nothing else matters.
Goodbye Venustas. Goodbye beauty and proportion.
Which naturally leads to his second pathology, aesthetic nihilism. This is the active, sometimes aggressive rejection of beauty as either entirely subjective or completely irrelevant.
It's intentional ugliness.
It's the arrogance of modern design that says, we don't need classical harmony or Aquinas' proportion. We are enlightened, we are above such outdated, sentimental concepts.
And what's a third pathology?
Spatial alienation. The creation of environments that actively disrupt rather than sustain human community.
Making us feel alone.
When you combine functional reductionism with aesthetic nihilism, the unavoidable result is that you build spaces where humans feel deeply alienated from the space, from one another, and ultimately from themselves.
This circles right back to the idea of buildings as false witnesses. If architecture is a moral text, a functionally reduced, aesthetically nihilistic building is telling a massive lie about what a human being actually is.
What is the lie?
It says, you do not need beauty. You do not need community. You are a machine. You only need a pod to sleep in, a screen to look at, and a concrete road to drive to work on.
Consider the metaphysical depth of that lie. It reflects a much deeper cultural error. It is the modern denial that reality even has an intrinsic order or meaning.
We think everything is just random.
Right. If there is no overarching objective order of love, light, and life, if we are just random atoms bouncing around in a meaningless void, then there is no truth for our architecture to align with. Our buildings might as well reflect that chaotic meaninglessness.
But the tragedy is, we aren't just atoms in a void. We are human beings with souls and a deep need for connection. And so we suffer immense psychological damage when we are forced to live inside that engineered meaninglessness.
It breaks us down.
Having diagnosed this massive historical rupture from Vitruvius to the warnings of Ruskin to the grim reality of Scruton, we have to look at how this aesthetic nihilism physically manifests today. Let's look at the anatomy of spiritual decay in modern architecture.
The source text outlines three specific, highly visible architectural markers of this spiritual decay. If you walk outside right now, you will see these in almost every modern city.
Okay, what's the first one?
The first marker is utility without dignity.
Utility without dignity. The nutrient paste again.
Yes. Think of sterile, brutalist housing blocks. Think of massive, windowless institutional buildings. Think of environments where every single surface is hard, reflective, and unyielding.
Those harsh fluorescent lights and concrete floors.
The text explicitly states that these spaces signal a reduced view of humanity. They reveal a bleak anthropology where citizens are treated as inventory to be managed, processed, and stored.
It's the difference between a home and a storage facility. A home assumes the dignity of the person inside it. A storage facility assumes you are holding inventory.
That's the perfect distinction.
If your city builds housing blocks that look fundamentally indistinguishable from shipping container yards, your city is confessing that it views its citizens as cargo.
The second marker of decay is one that has become so normalized we barely even notice it anymore, and that is disposable infrastructure.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we rarely think of buildings' lifespan as a moral issue.
Yeah.
Usually we just complain and say, oh, they don't build things like they used to, and we blame cheap contractors.
But Thornberry insists that disposability is profoundly moral. Disposable infrastructure includes the deliberate use of short lifespan materials, rapid turnover commercial developments, and planned obsolescence in urban design.
So building things that are meant to fall apart.
Think of the modern strip mall, built with cheap stucco over wood framing, designed with the full financial knowledge that it will be structurally compromised and torn down in 20 years.
If we constantly build for the immediate present, if we intentionally plan for our buildings to be obsolete in a single decade, we are literally training generations of people to expect collapse. We are severing our connection to eternity.
I want you to think about the psychology of temporal horizons here. What does it say about a culture's belief in its own future when it builds strictly to discard?
It says we don't believe we have a future, or at the very least, we don't believe our future is worth preparing for.
It's a very present-focused mindset.
Contrast that with the medieval builders working on a cathedral. A stonemason in the 12th century would spend his entire adult life carving intricate floral patterns high up in the nave, knowing full well he would die of old age before the roof was even finished.
He would never see the completed building.
Right. He wasn't building for his own immediate utility. He was building for his great-grandchildren. He was building for eternity. That is the architecture of life. It represents continuity and legacy.
A civilization that builds a disposable stucco strip mall has entirely abandoned the concept of legacy. As Thornberry argues, this is the architecture of a people who no longer believe in permanence, who have severed themselves from eternity.
Severed themselves from eternity.
When everything around you is temporary, cheap, and disposable, it is only a matter of time before you begin to experience your own civilization, your relationships, and perhaps your own life as temporary, cheap, and disposable.
It induces a kind of civilizational vertigo. Nothing is grounded. Everything is fleeting. And that brings us to the third marker of spiritual decay in the text, the collapse of beauty.
We've touched on beauty as a light of truth, but here Thornberry highlights its total absence as the definitive symptom of a dying culture.
A dying culture, not just a shift in taste.
When a society stops even attempting to build beauty, it signals a massive fragmentation of vision. It is a complete withdrawal from transcendence.
It's throwing in the towel. It's a culture saying, we don't share any common values anymore. We don't agree on what is good or true. We don't even know what a human being is. So we'll just build a gray glass box, maximize the square footage, and call it a day.
It is an absolute admission of defeat. To quote the text directly, when a society stops building beauty, it is no longer aiming at truth. It is merely surviving, not living.
Okay, the diagnosis is incredibly severe. We've replaced human dignity with cold utility. We've replaced permanence with disposability. And we've replaced beauty with aesthetic nihilism.
It's a comprehensive failure.
But I want to move from the philosophical to the practical. Because these dehumanizing spaces aren't just passive backdrops, right? They aren't just ugly wallpaper that we can ignore if we try hard enough. They are active agents.
That is the critical pivot in Thornberry's work. The built environment is a structured moral field. It acts upon us continuously every single time we move through it.
So how exactly do these sterile, disposable environments physically alter the human psyche? Show me the receipts. Because this brings us to section 5 of our deep dive, fractured spaces, fractured souls, and what the text refers to as the 2026 reality.
The core premise here is that disordered environments inevitably produce disordered human experiences. And they do so not magically, but mechanically, as a direct consequence of spatial geometry.
Mechanically, like gears turning.
The text points out how disconnection becomes a structural reality.
Structural disconnection, meaning the isolation isn't an accident, it's practically enforced by the physical layout of the city.
Let's look at the mechanism of that. Consider how highways are routed through American cities. In the mid-20th century, massive expressways like the Cross Bronx Expressway, pushed through by Robert Moses, were literally blasted through established, highly functional, dense neighborhoods.
They just paved right over them.
The geometry of the highway physically severed the relational coherence, the love of that community. A 6-lane road with a 60-mile-per-hour speed limit physically prevents a child on the north side from playing with a child on the south side.
It's a wall.
It effectively deletes that relationship from existence.
It destroys the physical capacity for communion. Let's talk about zoning laws, too, because I know Thornberry attacks modern zoning pretty hard.
Yes, specifically rigid Euclidean zoning. This is the legal framework that separates human life into isolated single-use pods.
Single-use pods.
You are mandated by law to sleep in one purely residential zone. You must commute to work in a separate commercial zone 10 miles away. You must buy your groceries in a third retail zone.
So everything is disconnected.
This creates car-dominant systems that virtually eliminate spontaneous human interaction. Think about your daily geometry in that system.
Okay, my daily geometry.
You transition from an isolated house into an isolated metal box on wheels and drive to an isolated office cubicle. At no point does the physical environment allow you to naturally bump into a neighbor on the sidewalk.
Let me ask this directly on behalf of the listener, because this is a radical thought. Is Thornberry actually arguing that the mundane zoning laws in my specific city or the way the bypass cuts through my town are actively, intentionally engineering human isolation?
Yes. The text states, these spaces do not merely reflect isolation, they engineer it. When the geometry of space denies relationship, The human soul experiences negation. And you asked for the receipts earlier.
I did. What's the data say?
The proof of this is found in the sociological data, which the treatise labels the 2026 reality.
What exactly do these studies show? How are they measuring this stuff?
Thornberry aggregates several recent, highly detailed urban studies. One methodology involved tracking the cortisol levels, the stress hormone, and the heart rates of pedestrians.
Okay, biological tracking.
The researchers had participants walk past varied, highly detailed classical masonry facades and then had them walk past massive blank sheer glass and concrete walls.
Let me guess. The blank walls caused a system crash.
The biometric data was definitive. Heart rates spiked and cortisol levels surged when walking past the blank, low-beauty environments.
That's crazy.
The human nervous system literally interprets aesthetic nihilism as a physical threat. The studies confirmed a massive correlation between low-beauty, low-cohesion environments and increased rates of clinical depression and anxiety.
What about community trust?
It completely evaporates. There is documented, drastically reduced social trust in fragmented transient communities. If you live in a cheap, disposable apartment block and you know your neighbor is likely to move in 2 years and you know the building itself might be torn down in 15 years, you do not invest in that relationship.
Why would you? It's all temporary.
Exactly. The disposable architecture creates disposable relationships. You withdraw into your pod.
And what about crime? Because we constantly argue about policing and economics, but how does the architecture itself actually play into it?
The data shows a massive correlation between crime and neglected, dehumanized spaces. And this isn't just magic, there is a physical mechanism here. It echoes Jane Jacobs' famous concept of eyes on the street.
Eyes on the street, meaning people are watching.
When you build a neighborhood with mixed-use zoning, front porches, and varied businesses, people are naturally outside. They're watching the street. There is passive, continuous community surveillance.
Right, the community polices itself just by existing.
When you build massive windowless concrete blocks surrounded by parking lots, you remove the eyes on the street. You create dead zones.
It's the broken windows theory, but operating on a metaphysical level. If the environment is a false witness, if the building lies about human dignity and says nobody cares about this space, then human behavior degrades to match the lie. The geometry literally invites the crime.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, I want you to consider the gravity of this. This is the turning point where Thornberry issues the ultimate warning. The text argues that societal collapse does not begin with a loud, dramatic, violent revolution.
It doesn't start with mobs burning things in the streets.
Exactly.
How does it start?
It begins invisibly in the drafting rooms of architects and city planners with this exact ontological misalignment. When buildings no longer reflect truth, we suffer a failure of light. When spaces no longer foster relationship, we suffer a failure of love.
And life.
And when environments no longer sustain human flourishing or plan for the future, we suffer a failure of life. When those three conditions are met, Thornberry says, civilizational collapse is not something coming in the future. It is already structurally embedded in the concrete.
The fuse is already lit.
The physical world has begun to actively testify against its builders. The isolation, the depression, the social fracturing, these are just the biological and sociological symptoms of the architectural poison we have willingly administered to ourselves.
That is incredibly sobering.
Yeah.
I mean, you look out the window and the skyline is a frozen moral map. And right now, for a lot of us living in these sprawling concrete megalopolises, that map points straight toward collapse.
It's a bleak diagnosis.
It's heavy. And this is why we do these deep dives, because we don't just wallow in the doom and gloom. The source material doesn't leave us in total despair. Thornberry actually offers a concrete, practical blueprint for restoration. We've diagnosed the disease, we've looked at the X-ray. Now, what is the antidote?
The antidote is detailed in the final chapters of the text as a restorative movement called conscious construction. And Thornberry is very clear to establish what this is not. This is not about architectural nostalgia.
Right. We aren't suggesting everyone tear down their modern homes and try to build a replica 18th century colonial village. It's not a historical theme park.
Exactly. You cannot just paste fake historical details onto a modern structure and call it a day. Conscious construction is an ontological realignment. It is about returning to the fundamental laws of reality.
Source code.
The movement is defined by 3 specific, actionable commitments that perfectly mirror the original triad we discussed.
Love, light, and life. Let's walk through them. If an architect or a city council wants to implement conscious construction, what is the first commitment?
The first is reordering around love. This means practically asserting the absolute primacy of human dignity over pure economic efficiency.
Choosing people over cheapness.
In design terms, it means designing for encounter, not isolation. It means restoring pedestrian walkability, prioritizing shared public squares, and mandating mixed-use environments that assume human beings want and need to interact with one another.
So it means legally allowing the coffee shop to open up right next to the bookstore, with family apartments built on the floors above them, surrounding a shaded plaza where children can safely play without the constant, terrifying threat of a 6-lane arterial road.
It brings everything back together.
It's architecture that physically declares we belong to each other.
That is a perfect visualization. The second commitment is recentering in light. This means a radical fidelity to truth in building. Architecture must once again embody clarity, human proportion, and intelligibility.
And what about beauty?
Critically, it means treating objective beauty as a non-negotiable principle, not a luxury add-on.
Beauty isn't the premium trim package on a car. It is the engine. A building should use honest materials. If it looks like brick, it should actually be brick. And it should be proportioned in a way that honors the scale of the human body.
And the third commitment is building for life. This is the conscious orientation toward flourishing and the total rejection of our disposable culture.
No more planned obsolescence.
It means prioritizing durability over disposability. It means demanding that we build structures intended to last 100, 200, 500 years. We must prioritize legacy over immediacy.
We need to start building things that our great-grandchildren will walk past and feel a profound sense of awe, rather than a sense of dread. Okay, I love this framework, but I want to make it intensely practical and actionable. I don't want this to just be an abstract philosophy lesson. I want to issue a challenge to the listener right now.
I think the text demands that kind of application. Go ahead.
Tomorrow, or even today if you're already out and about, I want you to walk your neighborhood. And I don't mean just power walking through it with your noise-canceling headphones in, staring down at the pavement. I want you to actively look at the built environment around you. Audit your city using Thornberry's framework. Ask yourself 3 specific questions.
This is a great exercise.
First, does this physical space encourage relationship or does it enforce avoidance? When you walk down your street, is there a public place to sit? Is the sidewalk even wide enough to walk side by side with a friend? Or are you forced single file against a chain link fence while cars rush past at 50 miles an hour? Where you see engineered isolation, love is absent.
That's step 1.
Second, does this structure reflect care or indifference? Does it feel rationally ordered or disorienting? When you look at the commercial buildings in your town, do they have human proportions? Do they use honest materials, or is it just cheap styrofoam veneer peeling off the corners of a strip mall? Where you see confusion, deception, and ugliness, light has been dimmed.
And the third question.
Third, does this environment feel durable or disposable? Is it built to last for a century, or is it already rotting and decaying after 10 years? Where you see planned obsolescence and cheap construction, life is actively withdrawing.
That is exactly the practical audit the text is hoping to provoke, because once you see it, you cannot unsee it. You are no longer merely observing poor design or bad municipal zoning laws. You are witnessing ontological misalignment in real time. You are learning to read the geometry of conscience.
You're finally seeing the source code.
Yes. And as the treatise declares in its most powerful summarizing thought, to build, therefore, is always to confess.
To build is to confess. That is a haunting phrase.
Every foundation laid in the dirt, every line drawn on an architect's blueprint, every municipal city plan voted on by a council, it is a declaration.
A confession of what we value.
It is a society confessing exactly what it truly believes about reality, about the value of the human person, and about the nature of the good. It is either building in harmony with the eternal laws of flourishing, or it is quietly, structurally preparing for its own collapse.
So what does this all mean for us? We started this deep dive talking about that visceral, sinking feeling of dread when you walk past a massive, sterile concrete block. And what we've discovered over the last hour is that your intuition is entirely correct.
It's not just in your head.
We've traced the metaphysical triad of love, light, and life. We've looked at Vitruvius and Aquinas, who proved that beauty is an objective, structural requirement for truth.
The classical foundation.
We've heard the historical warnings of Ruskin regarding the loss of human dignity when we treat builders like machines, and Scruton's devastating diagnosis of modern aesthetic nihilism. We've seen the hard data showing how utility without dignity and disposable infrastructure actively fracture our souls. leading directly to the anxiety, isolation, and crime of the 2026 reality.
The data speaks for itself.
The ultimate takeaway is this. We do not live in neutral structures. We live inside the physical consequences of our moral reality. The crisis of modern architecture isn't about running out of materials. It is fundamentally a crisis of conscience. And conscious construction forcing our built world back into alignment with love, light, and life is the only sustainable path forward.
It's the only way to reverse the collapse.
But I want to leave you, the learner, with one final provocative thought. Thornberry's text focuses heavily on the macro scale. It looks at grand civilizational architecture, city skylines, urban planning, massive public spaces, and the sweep of history.
The big picture.
But if to build is to confess, and if the space around us actively, mechanically shapes our souls, what does the architecture of the microenvironments that you control confess?
That's a great question.
Think about it. You might not be a municipal city planner. You might not be an architect laying the foundation for a billion-dollar skyscraper. But you are the architect of your own spaces. Think about the physical layout of your living room right now.
What is it confessing?
Is all your furniture pointed at a massive television screen, practically isolating everyone in the room into their own digital bubble? Or is the space physically arranged to foster eye contact, conversation, and encounter?
Is it ordered for love?
Exactly. What about your office cubicle? Does it reflect your dignity, or does it reflect mere utility? What about the literal digital architecture of your phone's home screen? Because that is a space you inhabit for hours every single day.
We spend so much time there.
Have you arranged those digital spaces to prioritize relationship and truth? Are you engineering your own daily microspaces for flourishing, love, light, and life? Or have you accidentally designed your own life for isolation, distraction, and rapid obsolescence?
It really makes you reconsider your immediate surroundings.
The next time you walk past a building and feel that sudden chill, that sense of dread, don't just brush it off as a bad mood. Listen to it. It's the building confessing its truth. Make sure the spaces you build in your own life are confessing a better one. Work in the process. That is a haunting, profound thought to leave on.
It's something we all have to answer for ourselves.
You step into the world of creative technology, and suddenly you realize you aren't just choosing a tool to make your life easier. You are deciding exactly how much of the human struggle you are willing to surrender. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Thornberry's incredible framework. We encourage you to keep seeking truth, to keep fully participating in the messy, beautiful reality of life, and to keep aligning whatever it is you create with the good.